In 1961, the Freedom Riders worked to help African Americans become a more equal part of society by becoming a significant part of desegregation and the barrier of how it destroyed African Americans' lives. They did this by boycotting the Southern states' segregation barrier laws. They started protesting and breaking segregation laws. Through this, they changed the minds of the government and the people. The Civil War had ended 96 years ago, yet the country was still struggling with the separation of man by their race, also known as segregation, and treating African Americans as a lesser version of themselves. People were constantly attacking African Americans, leaving them to bleed on the streets and belittling them by calling them names and ruining their homes. The people in the southern states did everything they could to make sure that the superior white people didn't have to suffer from African Americans, as if just being present around them would harm them. Around this time was when Martin Luther King Jr. was becoming known for his many speeches on segregation and his dreams to end it. He also was involved with many different civil rights movements. Most states had put an end to segregation, but the southern states still felt it necessary to keep these laws in place because they still felt that other people would laugh if they were caught accepting others into their lives. People were constantly separating themselves from other races on purpose, as if they were just cut from a different cloth than them. One group of college students saw what was happening and knew that this was wrong. They wanted to put an end to segregation. The Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, recognized this and recruited these students for the first ever Freedom Riders. The first Freedom Riders consisted of 7 African Americans and 6 white people. They traveled on a Greyhound bus across states with the desire to educate people on race and equality. The Freedom Riders started their journey in Washington, D.C. and planned to travel all the way to Louisiana. The Freedom Riders boycotted segregation laws by protesting and boycotting bus laws all across the southern states and taking people to work and back on their own bus, so they didn't have to pay bus fees, because most African Americans were not allowed well-paying jobs, and this caused the government to lose money, considering that 80% of their bus riders were African American, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, or Native American. They traveled through many states successfully boycotting segregation laws without any major problems. Unfortunately, when they passed through Anniston, Alabama, everything changed. 2 mayors, John Patterson of Monroe, Alabama, and Fred Wilson of North Carolina, sent telegrams to each other claiming how they support one another in keeping out all possible riots caused by the Freedom Riders. They were both pleased with the idea of North Carolina calling Attorney General Kennedy to use his office or his power to keep the Freedom Riders from infiltrating North Carolina. Even Martin Luther King Jr. had said that they wouldn't make it out of Alabama. As soon as the Freedom Riders started their first sit-in on May 15, 1961, in Anniston, Alabama, the mob got into position. As the Freedom Riders left, they felt an eerie feeling that they were being watched. Before they knew it, they were being attacked. One member of the mob got onto the bus and declared that if you get off the bus, you will be attacked, and if you stay on the bus, well, it won't be much better. People slashed their tires, pulled them out of the bus, and beat them, with everything from sticks to chains to even lead pipes, till they were covered in their own blood. At one point, someone threw a firebomb through the Greyhound bus's window, screaming, "Fire in the hole!" The Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK, was one of the mobs that attacked them. The KKK is a group of people who go around killing many different people just because of their skin color. The KKK negotiated with the police so that they could attack the Freedom Riders for 15 minutes before the police were allowed to get involved. The KKK was known to kill people because of their race. The KKK manipulated innocent citizens to join them in these attacks by twisting words and showing them only the bad side of things. Reporters came quickly to the scene, but were horrified to find themselves being attacked. Even after the mob attacked the reporters, the mob was still angry and thirsty for blood, and started attacking random people on the streets. One 17-year-old boy was set on fire by someone in the mob. One of the other men attacked was named Jim Zwerg. As soon as the mob had wandered off, Zwerg was rushed to the hospital, but even the hospital didn't want to admit him for treatment, as they feared that the mob would start to attack them too. While he was in the hospital, Jim Zwerg stated, "We are willing to accept death." Thankfully, Jim Zwerg survived and later became a minister at the United Church of Christ. The governor of Alabama later claimed that they have experienced an invasion of these so-called Freedom Riders. The party that initiates a lawsuit before a court, also known as the plaintiffs, stated that shall on the ground of race, color, or national origin be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. During the court case, the judge stared at the wall, daydreaming, while the Freedom Riders spoke. All of this caused the people across the United States to get very irritated and disappointed by what the people in their fellow states were doing to these poor innocent people that have done them no harm. These attacks continued for months and months, and it turns out that they drew attention to themselves from all the commotion. They were being noticed by many different people, all across the globe, thus expanding their cause. Even though people knew that there was a high chance of death, they still chose to join them and fight for what was right. The new Freedom Riders were specially trained in nonviolent protests. This truly shows how passionate people were about these laws. As well as the Freedom Riders, there were many other movements as well, some of which include the Rosa Parks bus boycott, where an elderly woman refused to give up her seat to a white man; the court case Brown versus the Board of Education, where people protested separation in schools, thus influencing the Board of Education on May 17, 1944, to withdraw separation by race in schools; and Martin Luther King Jr.'s many famous speeches about freedom and equality for all, and many more contributed to the end of all racial segregation. In the fall of 1961, after all the boycotts, sit-ins, movements, and attacks, the Kennedy administration convinced the Interstate Commerce Commission to prohibit segregation for interstate transit terminals, or in other words, just no more bus segregation. Due to all of these many civil rights movements, people have over time become less and less racist. African Americans are now a much more welcome, appreciative, and equal part of society. Even though we may still struggle with racism today, we are striving for a better tomorrow. Thanks to all of these young people who risked their lives for the country, we can now live in harmony. All in all, the Freedom Riders were a major part of segregation's end. They helped African Americans have better lives in America. Through all of their battles, they proved that violence and discrimination are never the answer. In 1961, the Freedom Riders worked to help African Americans become a more equal part of society by becoming a significant part of desegregation and the barrier of how it destroyed African Americans' lives. They did this by boycotting the Southern states' segregation barrier laws. They started protesting and breaking segregation laws. Through this, they changed the minds of the government and the people.